AITA for expecting my boyfriend to pay me back for money I lent him. He borrows more and more from me, but it seems like he doesn't even think about giving it back. I female 24 have been with my boyfriend for 6 years. We met when I was 18, right as I was starting college, and he was a little older, already working full-time. We've basically grown into adulthood together. He's been my best friend, my support system, the person I share everything with. Our relationship hasn't been perfect, but I've always felt like we were on the same team. About a year and a half ago, he got himself into some pretty significant credit card debt. He never told me exactly how much, but from what I've gathered over time, it's enough that he's been stressed about it and trying to pay it off aggressively. I respected that. I understand how easy it can be to get caught up in debt, especially with how expensive everything has gotten. He told me he wanted to be responsible, get rid of it as fast as possible, and avoid interest stacking up. I supported him fully in that decision. But over the last 6 months, something started to shift. Because he was throwing most, sometimes all, of his paycheck straight into his credit card bills, he would occasionally come to me and say he needed help. It started small. Once, he asked me if I could send him some money so he could buy groceries. It was like $40, and he said he'd pay me back on Friday when he got paid. Friday came and went, and I didn't hear anything about it. I didn't bring it up, because I figured it was just food, and I wanted to be understanding. Then, a few weeks later, it was $60. Then 1 month, it jumped to $300. Another time, he needed $200. Most recently, it was another $100. Altogether, it's around $700 I've sent him over the course of about 6 months. And every single time, he has said he would pay me back when he got his paycheck. He never has. Now, I'm not struggling financially, but I'm also not in a place where I can just casually part with hundreds of dollars and not notice. I live alone, I pay my own rent, bills, student loans. I budget carefully. I'm not wealthy, but I've always tried to be generous with the people I care about. And when I give someone money, I truly don't do it expecting anything in return. But the thing is, he wasn't asking as a gift, he was saying, over and over again, that he would pay me back. And he never did. At first, I brushed it off. Then I found myself feeling weird every time he asked for more. I'd hesitate before sending it, wondering if this was just going to be another thing I'd never see again. It wasn't the money itself that started to get to me, it was the fact that I felt like he was slowly getting comfortable not following through. Like he didn't think it mattered, or that I wouldn't care. So finally, after the last time, when he asked for another $100, I sent it, but I also gently brought it up later that evening. I told him that I wanted to talk about something, and I made it very clear that it wasn't about the money, not really. I told him I understood he was going through a tough time, that I wanted to support him however I could, and that I didn't mind helping out occasionally. But I said that I noticed a pattern where he would say he'd pay me back and then wouldn't, and that it made me feel a bit taken for granted. I said I wasn't mad, but I wanted to be honest about how I was feeling before it built up into something worse. His reaction shocked me. He got really quiet at first, and then said that he was disappointed in me. He said he didn't expect that from me, that if the roles were reversed and I needed money, he would give it to me without hesitation and never ask for it back. He said he thought I was someone he could rely on, someone he could trust for help when things were tight. Then he said that now he saw that everything came with strings attached, and that I was no different from everyone else who only does things if there's something in it for them. He even said it wasn't easy for him to ask for help, and that I made him feel small for doing it. I was stunned. I felt like I had just been hit in the chest. I told him again that I wasn't upset about the money, but that I was hurt by the fact that he would promise to pay me back and then not follow through. I said that if he had just been upfront with me from the beginning and said, "Hey, I'm in a rough spot and I don't know when I'll be able to pay you back," I would have been fine with that. But making promises over and never keeping them, that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't about dollars, it was about trust. He didn't really respond to that. He just kept saying that I made him feel like a burden, that he felt like he couldn't count on me now, and that it made him question a lot about our relationship. I cried that night, alone, because I couldn't understand how a conversation that I had approached so carefully and kindly had somehow turned me into the bad guy. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't accused him of anything harshly. I just wanted to express a boundary before it got worse. But instead, he made me feel like I had betrayed him. Since that night, things have been awkward between us. He's been more distant. I don't think he's angry, but I know he's hurt. And now I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, afraid to bring anything up because I don't want to make it worse. But also, deep down, I feel like this was unfair to me. I've given, and the one time I asked for accountability, not repayment, just honesty, I was told I was selfish. So now I don't know where I stand. I never wanted the money back. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't being quietly taken advantage of. I feel guilty for making him feel hurt, but also confused about whether I was wrong to begin with. I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to be that person he could rely on. But I didn't want that to mean I had to silence my own discomfort to preserve his. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for expecting my boyfriend to pay me back, or at the very least, for being honest about how frequently he's been asking and not following through? Should I have just kept quiet and let it go? Update 1. After that conversation, although we didn't break up, something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it wasn't a screaming match or a slammed door, it was quieter than that. But I felt it. Like a thin, almost imperceptible crack that had appeared in the foundation of something I thought was solid. We still said, "I love you." We still spent time together. But underneath the familiar rhythm of our relationship, I could feel a sense of dissonance. I wanted so badly to fix it. To restore that feeling we used to have, that we were a team, that it was us against the world. So I let it go. I convinced myself that he had just been under pressure, that debt had made him more sensitive, more raw. I told myself that relationships aren't about keeping score, that sometimes you give more than you get and that's okay if it's for someone you love. I told myself I was strong enough to carry a little more weight if he couldn't right now. And so when he asked for money again, I gave it. Not because I was afraid to say no, but because I genuinely wanted to help. Even after that painful conversation, I still wanted him to see me as someone he could rely on. I thought that maybe if I kept being patient, kept showing up, we could find our way back to each other emotionally. I kept giving, even as something inside me began to tighten. Then one day, he told me his phone had broken. Not just a cracked screen or some glitch, a total, unusable dead phone. He said he couldn't work without it. That his job relied on being reachable, that missing even one day could throw everything off. He said he needed $600 to replace it. I hesitated, but only for a moment. I reminded myself that he was trying to climb out of a pit, that one more blow like this could set him back. So I transferred the money. After that, the requests kept coming. There was $400 for car insurance. He told me it had lapsed and he couldn't risk driving uninsured. A few weeks later, it was $250 for utilities. He said the power company had sent a final notice and if it got shut off, everything would spiral. Then came the medical bill. $800. He said it was urgent. He didn't get into too many details, just that it involved a specialist visit and some kind of imaging, and he was waiting on reimbursement from his insurance, but it couldn't wait. I didn't argue. I didn't question. I just kept giving. I wasn't tracking how much by that point. I had stopped tallying it in my head because I was afraid of what the number might be. But at some point, I realized it was well into the thousands. I think part of me didn't want to admit that. It felt easier to pretend it was just a little here and there. But it wasn't. It was rent money. It was savings I'd been slowly building for the future. It was pieces of my security chipped away one Venmo, one Zelle at a time. And still, I told myself it was temporary. That he was trying. That he was doing the best he could. I believed that when things finally got better for him, when the debt was paid off, when work stabilized, when his feet were back under him, he'd look back and see what I had done. He'd understand the depth of what I gave, not just financially, but emotionally. He'd recognize how hard I tried to be the person he could lean on, how much I stretched to keep us afloat. He never offered an update. Never told me how close he was to being debt-free, never mentioned making a plan to pay me back. But he would kiss me on the forehead after I sent the money and say thank you, and in those moments, I convinced myself that it meant something. That even if he didn't say it, he knew. But late at night, I started feeling different. I would lie awake thinking about my bank account, about my dwindling savings, about how I was quietly building resentment I didn't want to have. I started questioning myself. Was I helping him or enabling him? Was I supporting him or being taken for granted? Still, I pushed those thoughts down. I silenced that voice because I wanted to believe in the version of him that was trying his best. I wanted to believe that this was a rough patch, not a pattern. I told myself love meant patience, sacrifice, faith. I hoped that when he could finally breathe freely, he would understand everything in return. Update 2. It had been months since I last brought up the topic of money. Since that night when I tried to express how I was feeling and ended up being painted as someone selfish and transactional, I hadn't dared to touch that wound again. I kept the peace. I played the supportive partner. I kept sending him money when he asked. Not always as quickly as before, not without a tight knot forming in my chest, but I still did it. I kept hoping that there would be a turning point, some light at the end of the tunnel that would make all of this feel like it had been worth it. I told myself that one day we'd look back on this time as something we overcame together. But then, life did what it always does, it threw me a curveball. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was already running late to work, juggling my coffee and keys, rushing out the door, when my car sputtered and died in the middle of the street. Just like that. No warning signs. No dashboard lights flashing days in advance. Just silence. I had it towed to a local shop and, after a few hours, the mechanic told me the repair would cost just under $500. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was more than I had available in my account after rent, bills, and the usual end-of-month stretch. My savings were thinner than they should have been, because of all the ways I had quietly chipped away at them to support him. For the first time in years, I found myself needing help. Not help in theory. Not emotional support. Not someone to listen. I needed real, practical help. A financial safety net. And after everything I had done, everything I had poured into him, it felt natural, fair, even, to turn to him. It was the first time in our entire relationship that I had ever asked him for money. And still, I felt nervous. Like I was crossing some invisible boundary. Like I was making myself vulnerable in a way I never had before. I messaged him, told him what happened, told him I felt really uncomfortable asking, but that I needed help. I said even $200 would be a massive relief, and that I'd pay him back as soon as I could. My heart was pounding as I hit send. He replied after a few minutes. He said, unfortunately, he could only give me $100 right now, because he himself was barely holding on. I thanked him. I said that anything helped. I accepted it because what else could I do? I didn't want to make him feel bad. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. But I sat there staring at my phone, at that message, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel fully in a long time, disappointment. Not just in the amount, but in the weight of the moment. I had never asked him for help before, and now that I finally did, he gave me a fraction of what I needed, with the kind of detachment that made me feel smaller than I ever had. I sat with it for a while. And then something in me cracked. I didn't lash out. I didn't accuse. I didn't explode. I just typed, slowly and quietly, that he knew he owed me a few $1,000s. That I had never demanded it, never even asked for it back outright, but it was still true. The reply came not long after. He said he didn't understand why I was even bringing that up. That he had just given me $100, the same way I used to give him. That it was all part of being a partner, one helps when they can, and it evens out in the end. He said that was the essence of a relationship. That we were just doing for each other what people in love are supposed to do. I read his words over and over, and it felt like a slow, numbing cold spreading across my chest. He didn't just forget. He didn't just ignore the years of unreciprocated help, the hundreds and then thousands of dollars that I sent without hesitation. He had rewritten it. He had reframed it into something mutual, something balanced, something that made it seem like we were standing on equal ground when we weren't even close. I thought about all the times he said he would pay me back and didn't. All the late nights where I stared at my dwindling balance after transferring money I couldn't really afford to lose. The time I skipped replacing my own cracked phone screen because he needed a new one more. The vacations I didn't take. The savings I didn't grow. I had poured so much of myself into keeping us afloat, into keeping him afloat, and he now looked at a single gesture, $100, as equivalent to years of quiet, consistent giving. As if it was the same. I felt something uncoil inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was the hollow clarity that comes when you finally see things as they are, not as you want them to be. I thought about how long I had been trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. About how much I had silenced myself, how much I had rationalized, how hard I worked to keep us together even as I chipped away at my own well-being to do it. I had believed in love. I had believed in him. And I had believed that helping someone through a hard time was part of loving them. But what I hadn't realized was how much of that belief was one-sided. How much I had shouldered without acknowledgement. And now, when I needed even a fraction of that love and effort back, I was being told we were even. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. Let it sink in. I was silent for a few minutes, and then I realized that something inside me had finally changed. Update 3. I spent weeks in a haze after that conversation. I went through my days like I was underwater, everything muffled, slow, distant. At work, I stared blankly at my computer. At home, I moved from room to room without purpose, opening drawers I didn't need, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. I kept replaying his message over and over in my mind, hearing the way he had minimized years of support, flattened it all down to a single gesture, as if we were even. As if the scale had ever been balanced. But what weighed on me even more than the words was the history we shared. 6 years. That's not a fling. That's not something you just walk away from overnight. That's long winters spent curled up on the couch, nights out that turned into memories, fights and reconciliations, birthdays and bad days and everything in between. That's growing up together. Changing together. Or so I thought. I went back and forth, over and over, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just walk away quietly. To stop justifying. To stop hoping he would see what I saw. But there was another part of me, the part that had always fought for this relationship, that still wanted to try. Not blindly, not by burying everything again, but with clarity. I realized that if I walked away without saying everything I needed to say, I'd carry it with me for years. I'd always wonder if it could have been different. I didn't want to end things over money. I wanted to know if what we had was still strong enough to survive honesty. So I decided to talk to him one last time. Not as an emotional ambush, not as a desperate plea, but as a conversation I owed myself. I printed out a list of the transfers I could find, Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, everything I had records of. It wasn't about presenting evidence. It wasn't about making him feel guilty. I just needed him to see it laid out, black and white. Not vague memories or hazy numbers. The reality of it. We sat down in his living room one evening. I was calm, but the kind of calm that comes from exhaustion, not peace. I told him that I didn't want our relationship to end over money. That would never be the reason. But I needed to know that my kindness had not been mistaken for weakness. That when I gave, it wasn't because I was passive or easy to take from, but because I loved him and wanted to believe in us. I told him that I had never asked for repayment, not because I didn't care, but because I trusted him to remember without needing to be reminded. And now, I needed to know if that trust had been misplaced. He was quiet for a long time. I watched him sit with it, really sit with it. No deflecting. No anger. Just silence. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low. He said he felt guilty. That every time he thought about the debt, he would feel this twinge of shame, but the longer I stayed quiet, the easier it became to convince himself that there was nothing to worry about. That if I wasn't bringing it up, maybe it wasn't really a problem. He admitted he had taken advantage of my silence, not maliciously, but out of convenience. Out of fear. He said he knew he had behaved unfairly and that he regretted it deeply. Then he surprised me. He proposed a plan. He said he would start paying me back $200 a month, and he wanted to set up recurring transfers so that I wouldn't have to ask or wait. He knew it wasn't much in the grand scheme of what he owed, but it was what he could do consistently, and more than that, it was a commitment. A sign that he was taking responsibility, not just for the money, but for the breach of trust that had formed between us. It wasn't the number that mattered. It was the acknowledgement. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was the only one carrying the emotional weight of what we'd been through. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. He saw it. He saw me. Since that day, things have felt different. Not perfect. Not magically healed. But more honest. We've started having real conversations, not just about money, but about everything we used to avoid. About resentment, about guilt, about expectations we both had but never voiced. We're learning how to be transparent in ways we never were before. Not just saying, "I love you," but backing it up with action. Not just assuming the other person is okay, but checking in. Listening. What I've come to understand is that it was never really about the money. That was just the surface. What cracked beneath it was trust, the kind that forms quietly over years, and the kind that erodes just as quietly when one person stops being seen. I spent so long trying to be supportive, trying to hold everything together, that I didn't realize how invisible I had started to feel. And he, caught in his own struggles, didn't realize how far I had drifted. But now, for the first time in a long time, we're rebuilding. Not just by going back to what we had, but by creating something better. Something more real. More balanced. We're learning to show up for each other in ways that matter. Not just in words, but in actions. In the uncomfortable truths. In the moments when it's easier to say nothing, but more important to say something. Money didn't divide us. It just exposed what had been brewing underneath, unspoken things, assumptions, fears. And in that exposure, painful as it was, we found a way forward. One where we both carry the weight, together. And now, finally, it seems like we're really on the same page.